The fog lay thick upon London that winter evening, coiling about the lamp-posts like some spectral curtain, muffling hoof-beats and setting the gaslight aglow with an eerie haze. It was in such an hour, when the city seemed to breathe with secrets, that I first heard of the strange vanishments at Emberleigh Manor. The tale reached us not by telegram, nor by Scotland Yard's urgency, but through the trembling voice of a gentleman visitor who brought with him both dread and disbelief. As the fire in Baker Street sputtered low, his words seemed to draw us away from the comfort of our hearth into the very heart of mystery, where privilege and terror were locked in uneasy embrace. Even before Holmes stirred from his chair, I sensed that the case would lead us into the darker corners of England's grand houses, where reputation cloaked cruelty and silence concealed unspeakable acts. If you find yourself drawn into the shadows of these stories as I was, let me invite you to remain with us. Subscribe to this chronicle, lend it your company, and share it with others who find solace and fascination in the eerie half-light of Holmes's adventures. Your presence ensures that the echoes of these mysteries will continue to resound. The fire at Baker Street burned low that evening, its glow throwing wavering reflections upon the cluttered array of retorts, test tubes, and chemical instruments that marked my companion's peculiar industry. Outside, the winter fog lay heavy upon London, pressing close to the window panes and deadening every sound but the occasional clatter of a hansom upon the cobbles below. I'd been reading, half drowsily, a newspaper article describing the success of a charitable dinner held by Lord Wexford when the sudden ring of the bell startled both Holmes and myself from our occupations. He lifted his head, the keen eyes flashing toward the door with that instant alertness which betrayed the dormant energy of his mind. "You will observe, Watson," said he quietly, "that our visitor comes in haste, yet with hesitation. The cab has not yet driven off. Doubtless he intends to remain no long time, but long enough to relieve himself of a burden." A moment later, Mrs. Hudson entered, bearing a card upon her tray. Holmes glanced at it and gave a low whistle. "Mr. Alistair Penfield of Emberleigh Manor," he murmured, "a family of old standing in the Midlands. If I recall, they possess one of those expansive estates which the modern world finds increasingly expensive to maintain. A curious hour for a social call." He rose as footsteps sounded upon the stair. "Pray, show the gentleman in." Our visitor entered with the air of a man haunted by unseen pursuit. He was tall and well-built, yet there was a tremor in his hands as he removed his gloves. His eyes, restless and bloodshot, seemed fixed upon some dreadful recollection. When he spoke, his voice carried both refinement and fatigue. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I beg your pardon for this intrusion at such an hour. I fear my errand is not merely untimely, but grotesque." "Pray, sit down," Holmes said, motioning him toward the fire. "Grotesque matters are our profession." Penfield sank into the chair, clasping his hat between his knees. "You have, no doubt, heard of Emberleigh Manor. It has been my family's seat for 3 centuries. We have weathered wars, debts, and scandals, but never this. Within the past fortnight, 2 of our guests have vanished. Vanished, sir, utterly, as though swallowed by the air." Holmes leaned forward slightly, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. "The same manner in each case." "The same in all that can be said of nothing," Penfield answered bitterly. "No marks of violence, no cries in the night. The first disappearance, Lady Armitage, a friend of my sister's, occurred 3 nights before Christmas. She retired early after supper, complaining of the chill. In the morning, her bed had not been slept in. A search was made at once, but she was nowhere upon the grounds. The second, a gentleman, Mr. Felix Rowden, vanished 2 days ago under identical circumstances." Watson's instinctive sympathy found voice before I could restrain it. "Surely you have informed the police?" Penfield nodded. Lestrade himself came down from Scotland Yard. He examined the house, questioned the servants, and declared there must be some private motive. elopement, or flight from debt. But these explanations are impossible. Lady Armitage was a woman of 60, and Mr. Rowden a barrister of unblemished name. Moreover, they left behind every possession, every scrap of luggage. Their rooms were as orderly as when they entered them. There was not even a footprint upon the gravel paths outside the windows. Holmes had risen, his gaze fixed upon the dancing flame. And yet they are gone. Gone, Penfield whispered, and the household is on edge. Servants mutter of ghosts, of ancestral curses, of sounds in the wainscoting at night. My sister is near collapse from fright. I confess, Mr. Holmes, that I myself can no longer dismiss these tales as superstition. I've seen things. Describe them, Holmes said sharply. There are movements of light in the eastern corridor, Penfield said, doors that open of themselves. Once I followed a shadow along the gallery near the old family portraits, thinking it a servant, but when I turned the corner, nothing was there. The air was cold as the grave. Forgive me, I sound mad. Holmes's expression softened slightly. Madness is not in the seeing, but in refusing to see. You say two vanished. Were there others before them? Penfield hesitated. There were rumors, decades old, of a maid who disappeared one winter and another incident my grandfather never spoke of, but nothing proved. Emberleigh is ancient, Mr. Holmes. It stands upon ground that once belonged to a priory dissolved by Henry VIII. Beneath the east wing there are sealed passages that lead no one knows where. Holmes's eyes gleamed with that peculiar light I had come to recognize as the herald of his full intellectual engagement. Ah, sealed passages. And the disappearances occurred in rooms adjoining that wing? Penfield started. Yes. How could you know? It is the simplest deduction. The east wing, older construction, unmodernized, likely with hidden cellars or priest holes. If one were to vanish without trace, the architecture itself offers the opportunity. You perceive the physical possibility, Watson. Perfectly, I said. But to what end? Surely there must be some human hand behind this. Undoubtedly, Holmes murmured. Ghosts seldom carry off their victims in silence. Mr. Penfield, do you suspect anyone among your household? Penfield's answer came reluctantly. There is one, our steward, Mr. Brand. A capable man, long in our service, yet I have found him lately evasive. He avoids certain parts of the house at night, though his duties should require inspection. My sister distrusts him. Excellent, Holmes said briskly. And the household now? How many guests remain? 4 besides ourselves, said Penfield. A clergyman, a retired colonel, and 2 ladies who refuse to be left alone even in daylight. Holmes smiled faintly. A most stimulating environment. You may expect me on the midday train tomorrow. Penfield's relief was palpable, though shadowed still by unease. You will come to Emberleigh yourself. I will, with Dr. Watson here. In the meantime, speak to no one of our involvement. Let it be thought that you have despaired of outside assistance. Fear breeds carelessness, and we may learn more in a day of silence than a week of talk. Penfield rose, shaking Holmes's hand fervently. You give me hope, sir. Emberleigh has grown so strange, so oppressive, that I fear what another dawn may bring. When the door closed behind him, Holmes turned to me with that half-smile which always presaged adventure. Watson, said he, we have at last been granted a mystery fit for the frost. Pack your revolver and something warm. The air at Emberleigh is sure to be cold, and not merely with the weather. I glanced at the window. The fog outside pressed thick against the glass, reflecting the dim shapes of carriages moving like phantoms through the night. You believe there is danger, Holmes? Danger? He struck a match and relit his pipe. There is always danger when human fear meets human ingenuity. What interests me is the motive. 2 guests gone, both respectable, both unconnected. A manor of ancient lineage and secret architecture. It has the flavor of design, Watson, not accident. Somewhere within those walls, a purpose hides. He paced the room, the blue smoke curling about him like the fog outside. Observe the pattern. A woman of years and a man of the law. One of sentiment, one of reason. Each represents a different kind of threat to secrecy. Suppose Emberleigh holds some long-buried crime. The lady may have overheard, the lawyer may have understood. Both silenced. Then you think murder? Or worse, Holmes said softly. Disappearance without death leaves room for dread, and dread is a more efficient deterrent than the gallows. We spoke little after that. The clock ticked, the fog pressed closer, and Holmes sat motionless, his eyes half closed but his mind alight behind them. I could almost see the machinery of deduction unfolding, weaving Penfield's scattered words into invisible pattern. At last, he said quietly, "You recall, Watson, the case of the copper beeches? How the architecture of a house concealed its crime? I suspect Emberleigh may be its grim cousin." When I retired, it was with a strange chill upon me. The notion of a house that swallowed its own guests was grotesque, yet Holmes's certainty lent it the weight of fact. Before I fell asleep, I heard him still moving about in the sitting room, consulting atlases and county registers, humming softly to himself. Outside, the fog horn from the river moaned like some vast beast in slumber, and I dreamed of corridors that led forever downward into darkness that no lamp could pierce. Morning brought a pale sun fighting through the mist. Holmes, already dressed, greeted me with uncharacteristic cheer. "Our train leaves at 11, Watson. I trust your appetite for the uncanny has not diminished." "Hardly," said I, reaching for my coat. "Though I must confess, the idea of entering that place sets my nerves on edge." He smiled. "That, my dear fellow, is merely the beginning of interest. A mystery without fear is like a play without audience." And so, as the cab bore us toward Euston through the thinning fog, I looked back once toward the familiar windows of Baker Street, already dimmed by distance. Little did I suspect how far from safety we were traveling, or what shadow awaited us at Emberleigh Manor. The riddle of the disappearing guests had only just begun to unfold, and before it ended, we were to look upon scenes that would haunt both our memories and our dreams. The morning was crisp when we set forth from London, the air so clear that the breath from the horses rose in ghostly plumes before us. I had often found that there was something peculiarly invigorating in those early hours of departure upon a new case, something that sharpened the senses and brought a peculiar excitement to the blood. Holmes, however, sat opposite me in the railway carriage, his long fingers pressed together beneath his chin, his gaze fixed not upon the passing fields, but upon some inner horizon known only to himself. His silence was not the silence of weariness, but of thought so deep that it rendered even the rumble of the wheels a mere background hum to the orchestration of his mind. I have long since learned that to disturb him in such a mood is to derail an invisible engine far more intricate than any machine of steel and steam. As the train bore us northward through the winter countryside, I observed frost still clinging to the hedgerows, the trees glistening like glass beneath the pale sun. Villages drifted past in brief tableau, church spires piercing the morning mist, solitary figures breaking ice in horse troughs, smoke rising lazily from chimneys. It was the England of stillness and endurance, unchanged by the passing of empires. Yet beneath that quiet beauty, I could not shake the chill that had settled upon me since our meeting with Alistair Penfield. Twice already, I had caught Holmes regarding me with that faint, knowing smile of his. At last he said, "You are uneasy, Watson." "I suppose I am," I admitted. There was something in that man's face, Holmes, a fear too profound for mere superstition. He nodded slowly. "You observed correctly. Penfield's fear is not of ghosts, but of guilt, though whether his own or another's I have yet to determine. Men seldom carry such expressions unless they bear knowledge too heavy for concealment." "You suspect him, then?" "I suspect everyone. Holmes replied calmly. It is the only condition in which the mind remains alert. As yet, I have only the outline of the affair, the vanished guests, the ancient house, the disused passageways. But patterns, Watson, are the soul of crime. Find the rhythm, and you will hear the intention beneath it. He turned his eyes once more toward the window, where the grey fields blurred into motion. There is something singular about disappearances, he mused. Murder leaves traces, flight leaves motive, but vanishment, true vanishment, defies both. To make a human being cease to be, without noise, without struggle, and without trace, that requires artistry. His words struck cold through me, though he spoke them as one might comment upon a chess problem. I said nothing more until the train slowed before a small rural station, where a single porter awaited us amid the crisp silence of the countryside. A waiting carriage, sent by Mr. Penfield, stood at the edge of the platform. Its driver, a thin, solemn man in livery, touched his hat and took our bags without a word. The journey from the station to Emberleigh Manor was long and winding. The road passed between high hedges heavy with frost, across stone bridges spanning sluggish streams, and through a village so small it seemed barely awake to the world. Children paused in their play to stare at the passing carriage, and an old woman at a well crossed herself as we went by, a gesture that caught my attention, though I could not say why. The countryside grew bleaker as we ascended. The trees thinned, replaced by stretches of moorland swept by wind and shadow, until at last a dark shape rose upon the horizon, Emberleigh Manor. Even from a distance, the place had a strange aspect. The main structure was of Tudor origin, with later Georgian additions, its chimneys tall and twisted, its roof lines jagged against the pale sky. A great avenue of bare elms led to the gates, and beyond them the manor loomed, surrounded by stone terraces and frozen fountains. There was beauty there, but a beauty marred by melancholy, as though the house itself grieved for something lost long ago. Holmes stepped from the carriage first, pausing to survey the facade with his customary precision. "A noble house," he murmured, "but one too proud for comfort. Observe, Watson, the upper windows of the east wing are shuttered, though the others stand open. The ivy there has not been cut in years. Decay in one portion of a dwelling often mirrors decay of conscience within." We were met at the door by a butler of venerable aspect, whose name, we learned, was Merrick. His expression was that of a man long resigned to secrets. He conducted us through a vast entrance hall lined with ancestral portraits, the air heavy with the faint scent of wax and age. The floor, though polished to a sheen, creaked beneath our feet as though resenting intrusion. Holmes's gaze darted from cornice to staircase, noting everything with his unfailing precision. At the foot of the great staircase, Alistair Penfield awaited us, his face pale and drawn. "You have come," he said simply. "You cannot imagine what relief that brings." Holmes inclined his head. "We travel where the fog of reason thickens, Mr. Penfield. Now, if you would be so good as to conduct us to the scene of the first disappearance." Penfield led us through a maze of corridors until we reached a long gallery hung with faded tapestries and lit only by the dim winter light, filtering through narrow mullioned windows. "Lady Armitage slept in the last chamber," he said. "The servants found her bed untouched in the morning." Holmes examined the door with meticulous care. The lock, he noted, was old but functional, and the hinges sound. Inside, the chamber was large and severe. A four-poster bed draped in crimson, a small writing desk, a mirror clouded with age, and a tall casement that overlooked the east lawn. Holmes's attention fixed immediately upon the window. He drew back the curtain, tested the latch, and peered outward. No balcony, no ivy strong enough to bear weight, no marks upon the sill. And yet this window faces the disused wing you mentioned. "Indeed," said Penfield. "The door between them has been sealed since my grandfather's time." "Where precisely?" Holmes asked. Penfield pointed toward the far corner, where the wallpaper bore a faint irregularity, like the outline of something long concealed. Holmes ran his hand across it, the fingertips sensitive as a musician's upon strings. A partition built over an older door. Yes, the carpenter's joinery is newer than the rest. Watson, do you perceive that slight draught? I nodded, feeling a cool breath of air against my cheek. Holmes smiled faintly. Then we may assume the wall conceals a passage, perhaps descending to the older foundations. Mr. Penfield, I must request that no work be done upon this until I've examined it further tonight. Penfield agreed at once. We next visited the second chamber, that of Mr. Felix Rowden. It lay directly below Lady Armitage's, sharing the same alignment toward the east. Holmes's examination there was even more thorough. He paced the floor, tapped the panels, inspected the ashes in the fireplace, and even measured the distance between the bed and the window with his walking stick. At last, he straightened and said, "A pattern indeed, but not yet a design. 2 vanishings from rooms upon the same vertical line, each adjacent to the disused wing. You will forgive me, Mr. Penfield, if I express the wish to explore that wing before dinner." Penfield hesitated. "It is unlit, sir. The doors have been bolted for years." "Then the bolts will serve to tell their own tale," said Holmes curtly. "Lead on." We passed through a narrow arch into a corridor heavy with the scent of damp stone. The air grew colder as we advanced, our footsteps echoing upon flagstones green with age. The bolted door stood at the end, a massive oaken barrier scarred by time. Holmes bent to examine the locks, which yielded more readily than expected. The hinges groaned in protest as the door swung inward, releasing a gust of stale air that seemed to carry whispers from centuries past. Inside lay a suite of rooms, long abandoned. Furniture lay shrouded in dust sheets. Cobwebs glimmered like lace in the half-light. In one corner, a section of wall had crumbled, revealing rough-hewn masonry behind. Holmes crouched beside it, striking a match and holding it close. "See here, Watson. The mortar differs from the rest. This was closed more recently than the rest of the chamber. You think it conceals an entrance?" "I'm sure of it," he replied. "But we shall wait until nightfall. Secrets prefer darkness." When we returned to the main hall, the transformation of atmosphere was remarkable. Fires burned in the hearths, and the murmurs of servants echoed faintly through the house. Yet, despite the outward comfort, I could not rid myself of the impression that every corridor watched us as we passed. At dinner, the household gathered, a subdued company of 8 souls. Penfield's sister, Miss Evelyn Penfield, pale and fragile. Colonel Ainsworth, the retired officer, his manner brisk but his eyes wary. Reverend Holt, whose hands trembled as he blessed the meal, and 2 ladies whose anxious glances never strayed far from the doorway. Conversation was strained. Talk of the weather, the estate, and the scarcity of servants in the countryside, all topics chosen to avoid the only one that mattered. Holmes, courteous as ever, said little, yet I noticed that his eyes moved constantly, studying each face in turn. Once or twice his gaze rested upon the steward, Mr. Brand, a tall, severe man whose composure verged on hostility. There was something in the way he poured the wine, his hand steady, yet his eyes averted, that struck me as unnatural. Holmes's interest did not escape him. I saw the faint tightening of his jaw. After dinner, as the household dispersed, Holmes drew me aside near the library. "You saw Brand?" "Yes, a most unpleasant fellow." "Unpleasant and careful," Holmes murmured. "His shoes are clean, though he has been in the cellars this evening. His keyring, I note, carries one ancient key polished by use, far older than the modern locks of this house. Such an object seldom remains idle. Tonight, Watson, we shall make our own examination of the East Wing." "You mean to enter it alone?" "Alone, save for your good revolver and patience. There is a mystery in these walls that calls for silence and candlelight, not conversation." And so, as the great clocks of Emberleigh struck midnight and the house sank into uneasy slumber, Holmes and I stole once more through the gallery toward the bolted wing. The draught whispered through the cracks, the boards creaked beneath our cautious tread, and somewhere deep within the manor, a door closed softly, though no one else was awake. Whether by accident or design, we were not alone in that sleeping house. The wind had risen by the time midnight deepened to its coldest hour, and as we entered the east wing once more, I felt that curious tightening of the chest which no amount of courage can wholly dispel. The candle Holmes carried cast a frail circle of light upon the walls, its flickering reflection catching the gilt of old picture frames and the tarnish upon forgotten mirrors. The air was still as the grave and smelt faintly of earth and mildew, as though we had stepped beneath the ground itself. Our footsteps seemed louder than they should have been, echoing down corridors that had known no tread for decades. Holmes held his light close to the floor, then to the ceiling, his eyes darting from one shadow to another with quick, mechanical certainty. "You will observe, Watson," he murmured, "that these boards bear impressions not wholly consistent with their age. Someone has walked here recently, though the dust is artfully disturbed to conceal it." I bent to look and saw faint lines, subtle swirls where the settled dust had been brushed aside and then restored in uneven film. "Someone from the household?" I whispered. "Unlikely. None would come here without purpose. The door's bolts were set from the outside. Only one with the key could pass through, and we have seen that key upon Mr. Brand's ring. There, Watson, beneath that archway. Do you see the wall's discoloration?" At first it appeared nothing more than a patch of damp, but as Holmes brought the candle nearer, the surface revealed a line, fine, deliberate, running vertical from floor to ceiling. He produced a thin blade from his pocket and inserted it into the seam. A portion of plaster gave way, falling soundlessly to the floor. Behind it, a faint draught stirred the flame. "A false partition," Holmes said softly, "and behind it, air, not stone. Shall we?" The panel yielded with a dry sigh. Beyond lay a narrow passage descending steeply into darkness. The smell that issued forth was ancient, airless, a mingling of damp masonry and something subtler, metallic, almost like blood long dried. I confess I hesitated upon the threshold. Holmes, however, stepped forward without pause, his candlelight bobbing down the stair like a will-o'-the-wisp. "Keep close," he said, his voice echoing faintly. "We are entering the oldest bones of this house." The staircase wound down into a space hewn from the original foundations. Stone walls, slick with condensation, the air thick enough to taste. After perhaps a dozen steps, we reached a small chamber no larger than a pantry. There were shelves along one wall, holding rusted tools and decayed wooden boxes. In the far corner, half hidden behind debris, lay an iron grate set into the floor. Holmes knelt beside it, brushing away grime. The bars were thick but corroded, and beneath them I thought I saw emptiness. Black, featureless, and deep. "A sub-cellar," Holmes muttered. "Not on any architectural plan I've ever seen. And note, this grate has been lifted recently. The dust about its edges has been displaced." He produced his magnifying lens, examining each mark. The tool used had a narrow curve, a key or small crowbar. The work was done within the week. "Look here. Fibers of fabric caught in the hinge, perhaps from a sleeve. And this, Watson, what do you make of it?" He held up a slender object glinting dully in the candlelight. It was a cufflink, engraved with the initials Pfeffar. "Rowden!" I exclaimed. "It must belong to Mr. Felix Rowden." Holmes smiled slightly. "Just so. The man vanished, and here lies his trace. Caught like a whisper. The question is not how he came here, but why." He pocketed the cufflink carefully and rose. "We shall not venture further tonight. The air below is foul, and I would rather enter prepared. Let us seal this place again and return as though nothing were discovered." As we ascended, a faint sound broke the silence, a dull rhythmic creak, distant but unmistakable. Holmes froze mid-step. "Someone is moving above us," he whispered. The candle flickered as if in agreement. We extinguished it at once, leaving only darkness and the faint scent of wax. The sound came again, closer now, a slow tread descending the corridor we had left open. Holmes's hand found my arm, steady as stone. "Remain still," he breathed. The steps halted just beyond the false wall. For several seconds there was nothing but the beating of my own heart. Then, from the other side, came the slow scratch of metal against wood, the unmistakable slide of a bolt being tested. Whoever was there did not attempt to enter, but the meaning was plain. Our secret was no longer our own. After a moment, the sound retreated, the steps fading into silence. We waited several minutes before relighting the candle and retracing our path to the main hall. Once there, Holmes replaced the outer bolts and turned to me with a face as composed as if nothing had occurred. "We have been observed," he said quietly, "and not by chance. Whoever lurks within these walls knows the passage exists and fears discovery." We retired to our chambers. Though sleep was impossible, I heard the wind moan about the gables and, once or twice, a faint sound as of movement in the corridor. It was near dawn when Holmes tapped softly at my door, fully dressed and alert. "The morning light will do us no harm," he said. "Let us walk the grounds before breakfast. I would see where that passage might emerge." The frost lay thick upon the lawns as we stepped outside. A pale mist clung to the trees, and the east wing loomed silent, its windows blind and shuttered. Holmes walked with quick, sure strides, circling the base of the building until we reached the farthest corner where the ivy grew dense. "Here," he murmured. "Do you perceive how the soil sinks in a shallow depression? Beneath lies the continuation of that sub-cellar, and note, there are scuff marks near the foundation, as if something heavy were dragged to or from a hidden entrance." He brushed aside the ivy and revealed what I had taken for natural shadow, a small bricked arch, its mortar cracked with age. "A sealed postern," he said, "once used for servants or smuggling, perhaps. If the sub-cellar connects to this point, one could pass unseen between house and grounds. A convenient path for one who wishes guests to vanish without departing." We returned to find the household astir. Miss Evelyn Penfield awaited us in the breakfast room, her delicate face pale beneath the morning light. "Mr. Holmes," she said in a voice trembling between gratitude and dread, "you have brought hope to us, though heaven knows how. The servants whisper more than ever. Last night, they say, someone saw a lantern moving in the gardens, though no one will admit to carrying it." Holmes bowed courteously. "Fear magnifies shadows, Miss Penfield. Still, I should like to question those who serve in the eastern wing, the maids, the steward, and the under-gardener." At this, she seemed hesitant. "Mr. Brand will be displeased. He rules the staff with an iron hand." "All the better," said Holmes. "Men who fear displeasure reveal truth when contradicted." Brand entered as though summoned by name. His tall figure filled the doorway, and the cold precision of his expression gave the impression of a man who measured every word before it left his lips. "You desired my attendance, sir." Holmes gestured for him to sit, though Brand remained, standing. "I understand you are responsible for the household's keys," Holmes began. "A heavy trust. You possess one, I think, belonging to the disused East Wing?" "I do, Mr. Holmes. It has not been turned in years. I keep it merely for completeness." "Indeed?" Holmes's tone was mild. "And yet the lock turns easily, the metal free of rust. I have seldom known neglect to polish iron so well." Brand's eyes flickered, only for a second, but enough for Holmes to note it. "Perhaps some servant, curious or foolish, has tampered without my knowledge." "Doubtless," Holmes replied evenly. "You will oblige me by producing that key before luncheon." The steward inclined his head stiffly and withdrew. Holmes turned to me as soon as the door closed. A man of discipline, but not invention. His composure cracks when faced with the impossible. That is the mark of guilt, or of one complicit in guilt. Before noon, Holmes made a detailed study of the manor's layout, tracing on paper the alignment of rooms, corridors, and staircases. "Observe," he said, "how the vanished guests occupied chambers along a single vertical axis above the sealed passage. If the mechanism of disappearance lies there, it must involve access from below. The grate we saw may be only one of several. Tonight we shall know." The day passed slowly, filled with restless tension. At intervals, I caught the servants watching us. Furtive glances, whispers quickly silenced. Miss Penfield seemed grateful for our presence, though she moved like one haunted by premonition. Toward evening, Lestrade arrived unexpectedly, his brusque energy a jarring intrusion into the house's subdued atmosphere. "Well, Mr. Holmes," said he, rubbing his hands before the fire, "I thought I'd see whether you'd turned up any of your famous deductions. The Yard's getting impatient for results." Holmes's expression betrayed amusement rather than irritation. "Your timing is fortunate, Lestrade. You may yet assist in an experiment, provided you can keep your men discreetly out of sight." Lestrade snorted. "An experiment? You're not about to start mixing your chemicals in the cellars again, I hope." "Something far simpler," Holmes replied. "Tonight we test whether Emberleigh's ghosts walk by choice or by design." That evening, under pretense of retiring early, Holmes and I returned to the gallery above the east wing. From our hiding place behind the heavy drapery, we could see the faint outline of the sealed door and the corridor beyond. The house was silent, save for the sighing of the wind through the chimneys. Midnight came, and with it, faint movement. A light glimmered below, wavering as if borne by an unsteady hand. Then footsteps, soft and deliberate, ascended from the lower floors. The flame drew nearer until, through the crack beneath the gallery rail, we saw its bearer. Mr. Brand, his face pallid, his eyes fixed straight, ahead, carrying a small lantern and a bundle beneath his arm. He paused before the wall we had uncovered, glanced swiftly about him, then pressed his hand to the partition. Holmes caught his breath. A section of paneling slid inward with a sound no louder than the turning of a page, revealing darkness beyond. Brand slipped through and vanished, the wall closing silently behind him. Holmes turned to me, his eyes gleaming with cold fire. "There, Watson," he whispered. "Our ghost walks in flesh and bone. The mystery of Emberleigh is about to breathe." For several moments after the panel slid shut behind the steward, neither Holmes nor I moved. The silence of the great house was so complete that the ticking of a distant clock seemed as loud as a hammer. Holmes's eyes shone with that peculiar glint of fierce satisfaction I had come to associate with discovery, the gleam of a predator scenting its quarry in the dark. "Come, Watson," he whispered at last, rising noiselessly from his crouch. "The time for conjecture is past." We follow. Without another word, he glided across the gallery with that feline stealth which was as natural to him as breath. I confess that my heart beat faster than prudence might justify, but there was something irresistible in that moment, the sense of standing upon the threshold of revelation. When we reached the panel, Holmes pressed his fingers lightly along its edge. "A simple pressure here," he murmured, "and the latch yields. Observe." The wall gave way soundlessly, revealing a black passage beyond, narrow as a coffin and steeped in the chill of stone. From somewhere below came the faint echo of footsteps and the wavering glow of Brand's lantern, already several turns ahead. We followed at a distance, our own light dimmed to a mere spark. The passage twisted sharply downward, its walls rough-hewn from the original foundation. At intervals, I could hear the faint scrape of metal against stone, as though the steward were unlocking something in the depths. Holmes paused once, holding up his hand. "Note the incline," he whispered. This descent aligns with the sub-cellar beneath the east wing. He is returning to the grate we found last night. The air grew colder still, carrying with it a rank odor of damp earth and old iron. Presently, we reached the chamber we had previously explored, the one with the iron grate. It stood open now, the bars lifted aside. Below, Brand's lantern flickered like a star swallowed by shadow. Holmes motioned for silence and crouched beside the opening, his ear inclined toward the sound. Faintly, we heard a metallic creak, then a low grunt of exertion, followed by a hollow thud. "He is moving something heavy," Holmes breathed. "A trapdoor, perhaps. And beneath it, listen, do you not hear the echo of water?" Indeed, there was the unmistakable murmur of some subterranean current. Holmes lowered himself onto the ladder affixed to the shaft, descending as noiselessly as a shadow. I followed, my revolver drawn and held close to my chest. At the bottom, we found ourselves in a vaulted chamber, the walls black with damp and glistening with a thin film of moisture. A narrow stream of dark water flowed through a stone channel, vanishing into an arched tunnel beyond. Across this stream lay a wooden platform upon which stood Brand, his back to us, laboring over some unseen burden. Holmes touched my sleeve and motioned me to remain hidden behind a buttress. Then he stepped into the open, his voice calm but cutting as steel. "That will do, Mr. Brand?" The steward started violently, the lantern in his hand swinging wide and casting grotesque shadows upon the walls. His face, when he turned it toward us, was ghastly, pale, the eyes wild and shining. "You," he gasped, "you have no right. I have every right," Holmes said evenly. "The right of reason over deceit, of justice over cowardice. You will kindly set down that lantern and move away from whatever lies beneath the cloth." For a moment, it seemed Brand might defy him. His jaw worked, and his fingers tightened about the handle. Then something within him broke. The lantern dropped from his hand and rolled to a stop, its flame guttering low. Holmes crossed swiftly to the platform and lifted the cloth. Beneath it lay a wooden chest bound in iron, its lock newly forced. The air above it reeked faintly of decay. "Open it," Holmes said. Brand's shoulders sagged. "You will regret this," he muttered hoarsely. "I rather think not," Holmes replied. With the tip of his cane, he raised the lid. Inside, wrapped in coarse sacking, lay the unmistakable outline of a human form. The face, what remained of it, was enough to turn my stomach. "Lady Armitage," Holmes said quietly. "Missing, but no longer vanished." Brand gave a strangled sound, half sob, half snarl. "I did not kill her," he cried. "By God, I did not. I only obeyed orders." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Orders from whom?" Brand pressed his hands to his face. "You would not believe me." "I have believed stranger things," said Holmes grimly. "Speak." The steward's confession came haltingly, torn from him as though each word drew blood. "It began with Mr. Penfield's debts," he said. "The estate is ruined, mortgaged beyond salvation. He swore me to secrecy. Then came the visitors. Wealthy friends, acquaintances of his sister. He discovered that one could disappear a person easily enough here. The house has its secrets, its tunnels and vaults no living soul remembers. I was to dispose of what remained. He promised me freedom, money, anything, but I swear to you, I never harmed them. I only hid the bodies." Holmes's eyes blazed cold fire. "And Roden?" Brand's face twisted. The lawyer uncovered the forgery. He threatened exposure. I found him dead at his writing table that same night. Poison, perhaps. God knows. Penfield made me carry him below before dawn. "Enough," Holmes said sharply. "Watson, note the time. 14 minutes past 2. The river below connects, I believe, with the old drainage system that runs beneath the east meadow, a convenient means of disposal." He turned back to the steward. "You will accompany us upstairs, Mr. Brand. Your complicity may be mitigated by cooperation, but should you attempt flight, remember that Dr. Watson is armed." Bran's spirit seemed broken. He followed meekly as we ascended through the narrow passage and emerged once more into the gallery. The house lay silent, the lamps extinguished, save for a faint glow seeping from beneath a distant door. Holmes halted. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. From somewhere ahead came the soft strains of music, piano notes, gentle and melancholy, drifting through the corridors. It was an air I recognized, though played with trembling hands. Schumann's Träumerei. Holmes advanced noiselessly toward the drawing room, motioning for me to remain just behind him. The door stood ajar. Within, by the light of a single lamp, sat Alistair Penfield, his back to us, playing. The music faltered as he sensed our presence. Without turning, he said, "So, it is done then." Holmes stepped into the room. "It is indeed done, Mr. Penfield. The dead tell their stories more plainly than you suppose." Penfield's hands froze above the keys. Slowly, he turned to face us. The transformation was startling. The proud composure of our first meeting had vanished. His face was ashen, his eyes hollow, yet there remained in them a strange serenity, as though the final act of some long play had been reached at last. "You found her," he said softly. "And Rowden too, I imagine." "We found enough," Holmes answered. "You used the tunnels to dispose of your guests, hiding your ruin beneath a mask of hospitality. When discovery loomed, you made ghosts of the inconvenient. A most elegant arrangement, until the ghosts returned with witnesses." Penfield rose slowly from the piano bench. "You think me a murderer. You are wrong. I sought only to preserve Emberleigh. The house is older than I, older than all of us. It demanded sacrifice. The first vanishings were accident, yes, but after that, how easily the house obliged. They came to me, Holmes, as if chosen. Do you not feel it? The pull of this place." His voice had grown fevered, his eyes bright with madness. Holmes regarded him with pity rather than anger. "I feel only the pull of conscience," he said quietly, "and I fear yours has slipped its moorings." At that moment, Brand gave a choked cry. "Sir, forgive me," he stammered, stepping forward. "I told them everything. I could not bear it." Penfield's expression softened, strangely. "No need for forgiveness, my good Brand. You have merely hastened what was already begun." From the folds of his coat he drew a small pistol. The movement was swift, almost graceful. Before I could reach him, Holmes had stepped aside, his voice cutting through the air like a whip. "Don't be a fool, man." Penfield smiled faintly. "A fool, yes, but a gentleman still." Then, with a single motion, he turned the weapon upon himself. The report shattered the silence. He crumpled without a sound. For several seconds, no one moved. The lamp flickered, casting long, tremulous shadows across the carpet. I bent beside him, but one glance was enough. Alistair Penfield was dead. Holmes stood over the body, his face grave, but not surprised. "There was no other end possible," he said at last. "The man was consumed by his own illusions. The ghosts of Emberleigh were not born of spirits, but of guilt." Brand had fallen to his knees, sobbing like a child. Holmes looked at him with cold detachment. "Compose yourself, sir. The law will have its say, but your master has already met his judgment." We roused the household soon after, and the ensuing uproar defies description. Lestrade, summoned from his quarters, arrived pale and incredulous as we led him to the underground chamber. The evidence spoke for itself. The bodies, the tunnels, the chests. Brand's testimony completed the chain. Holmes gave his account briefly, omitting no detail yet sparing no flourish. By dawn, the matter was in official hands. As the morning sun rose over the frozen lawns, Holmes and I stood upon the terrace overlooking the east wing. The frost glittered upon the windows like tears upon glass. "You see, Watson," Holmes said quietly, There are houses that outlive their masters and absorb their sins. Emberleigh is one such house. It will stand another century, perhaps, though men will whisper that it is haunted. In a sense, they will be right. There are places where evil lingers, not as phantoms, but as atmosphere. I looked back toward the silent facade, feeling an unease I could not entirely name. Do you believe it will ever be at peace? Holmes's eyes narrowed against the pale light. Peace is a human word. Houses, like men, must endure what they have built. Come, Watson, the case is finished. But its echo, I think, will follow us for some time. And as we left Emberleigh behind us, its dark chimneys receding into the mist, I could not help but feel that somewhere deep within its stones, the music of that last terrible night still played on, faint, mournful, and unending. The train bearing us back to London steamed southward through the grey dawn, leaving behind the frost-laden fields and the mournful silhouette of Emberleigh. I had hoped that distance might blunt the atmosphere of that dreadful house, but it clung to me like the chill of damp stone. Holmes sat opposite, gazing through the fogged window, his long fingers drumming absently upon his knee. The faint smell of tobacco mingled with the scent of wet wool and coal smoke. He had been silent since we left the manor, and I refrained from breaking that silence, knowing from experience that his thoughts were still engaged upon the case. At last he spoke, not turning his head. "You are uneasy, Watson." "I cannot help it," I said. "The manner of Penfield's death, the whole tragedy, has left me with a sense of unfinished business. The law will see the steward punished, no doubt, but there remains something unresolved, something that lingers." Holmes's reflection in the window seemed to smile faintly. "You speak as though the dead might yet appeal for justice." "Perhaps they do," I replied. Emberleigh felt alive in some dreadful way, as if the house itself hungered for misery. He exhaled softly. "You are not far from the truth. There is a contagion in guilt, just as there is in disease. Penfield's madness infected his household until reason itself succumbed. But you are wrong in one regard, my dear fellow. The affair is not concluded." I looked up sharply. "Not concluded." Holmes withdrew a folded newspaper from his coat. It was the Morning Chronicle, its front page bearing a small column of print. "Observe," he said, passing it to me. "The inquest upon Penfield's death has taken an unexpected turn. The coroner reports that the pistol found beside the body was not of English make. It bore a Belgian stamp, one identical by chance to a weapon registered to Mr. Felix Rowden." "But Rowden was murdered," I exclaimed. "Precisely," said Holmes. "Therefore, the weapon could not have been his, unless, of course, our assumption of Rowden's death was mistaken." I stared at him, aghast. "Holmes, you saw the bodies as I did." "I saw what remained of Lady Armitage," he corrected. "But the second chest, the one Lestrade's men removed from the vault before dawn, I did not personally verify its contents. I was occupied above with securing the steward. The identification came solely from the steward's word and from a signet ring found within." "You think the body was not Rowden's?" "I think," said Holmes slowly, "that we have been made to believe what another wished us to believe. There is an element in this case which even Penfield's confession does not explain. Why, for instance, did he speak of the house as though it possessed will? Why refer to accident in the first disappearance and inevitability in the second? Madness, yes, but madness often conceals method. What if the disappearances served not to conceal murder, but to mask flight? You mean Rowden may be alive?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "If he is, the motive changes entirely. A forged death, a faked corpse, and a man of law vanished into the world bearing secrets worth a fortune. Tell me, Watson, what better cover than the scandal of his own disappearance? Who would seek a corpse that the law already believes buried?" The idea was so startling that I could only sit and stare. The rhythm of the wheels beat against the silence like a heartbeat. "And Penfield's suicide?" I asked at length. What of that? Despair, certainly, Holmes said. But perhaps also manipulation. Imagine, Rowden, discovering Penfield's financial ruin, proposes a desperate remedy, an insurance scheme perhaps, or a blackmail plot involving forged bonds. When suspicion arises, Rowden vanishes, leaving Penfield to bear the blame. He returns secretly to the manor, using Brand as his accomplice to destroy evidence and silence witnesses. Penfield, already half-mad, believes himself cursed. A pistol appears in his hand, and the problem is solved for all concerned. You are suggesting that the lawyer orchestrated the entire affair. Holmes leaned back, the faintest glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. I suggest only that we have not yet seen the last of Mr. Felix Rowden. Mark my words, Watson, he will surface again, though under another name. Men of his intellect seldom perish quietly. The remainder of our journey passed in thoughtful silence. By the time we reached Baker Street, the city was stirring beneath a pale sun, its chimneys exhaling the familiar smoke that seemed to cleanse the mind of rural horrors. Mrs. Hudson greeted us with her usual mixture of affection and alarm, remarking upon our haggard appearance. Holmes ignored her protests and went straight to his desk, where the Morning Post lay neatly stacked. Among the envelopes was one addressed in a firm, precise hand. Unfamiliar, yet curiously deliberate. Holmes broke the seal and read swiftly. A flicker of triumph crossed his face. "As I expected," he murmured. "The game resumes." He handed me the letter. It contained only a few lines. "Mr. Holmes, some ghosts cannot be buried beneath stone. You sought truth in the wrong grave. Emberleigh's doors are closed, but another will open where the law dares not tread. If you would understand the nature of disappearance, look not to the dead, but to the living, who profit by them." A friend of the departed. There was no signature, only a faint watermark, the crest of a London insurance firm, Rowden's former employer. Holmes rose, pacing the room in that restless manner I knew well. "He taunts us, Watson. The handwriting is his, altered but recognizable. The postmark, Charing Cross, this very morning. Rowden lives, and he wishes me to know it. But to what end?" "To draw me further," Holmes said simply. "There is unfinished work, and he would have me finish it for him." Within the hour, we were once more abroad. Our first call was upon Inspector Lestrade at Scotland Yard, who greeted Holmes with his customary blend of suspicion and reluctant admiration. "Back so soon?" he grunted. "I thought you'd laid Emberleigh to rest for good." "Emberleigh's soil may rest," Holmes said dryly, "but the seeds it bore are sprouting in London. Tell me, Lestrade, did you yourself verify the second corpse from the Manor vault?" The inspector frowned. "No, the constables handled that." "Why?" "Because it was not Rowden," Holmes replied, "and unless I am much mistaken, your morgue is one body poorer than you suppose." Lestrade's exclamation of disbelief echoed through the office, but within half an hour he had sent for the records. They confirmed Holmes's suspicion. The body had been claimed earlier that morning by a man presenting papers from the Penfield estate, duly signed and witnessed by an attorney, one Mr. Frederick Rowland. The description of that attorney matched Rowden precisely. By noon, we were once more in pursuit. Holmes moved with that cold, electric precision that seized him when danger and intellect met upon equal ground. "You see the pattern, Watson," he said as we strode down the Strand. "He has stolen not merely his identity, but another's death. He may now move freely, shielded by the very crime we believed solved." We traced the trail to the offices of the Metropolitan Fidelity Company, where Rowden had once held partnership. There, the clerk confirmed that a Mr. Rowland had called earlier, retrieving certain sealed ledgers under pretext of liquidation. Holmes examined the signature with his lens, then smiled grimly. He cannot disguise the flourish of his R's. Rowden, beyond question, these ledgers must contain the evidence of his fraud, and perhaps the motive for murder. As we emerged onto the crowded pavement, Holmes paused abruptly. Across the street, a man was watching us from beneath the brim of a grey hat. For an instant, the morning light caught his face. A thin, sharp profile, the eyes cold and calculating. Then he turned, merging with the press of pedestrians, and was gone. Holmes gave a low chuckle, half admiration, half challenge. "The fox shows his tail, Watson. We shall not lose him twice." We pursued through the throng, dodging hansoms and delivery carts. Down Fleet Street, across Ludgate Circus, and into the labyrinthine alleys beyond St. Paul's we followed, catching glimpses of the grey hat, always just ahead. Finally, at the mouth of a narrow passage, Holmes halted abruptly. The street beyond was empty. Only the echo of our footsteps remained. "He knows the city too well," I panted. "Indeed," Holmes said, scanning the walls. "And he has friends. Look there, the marks on the mortar, freshly loosened bricks." He slipped through to the adjoining court before we turned the corner. He straightened, a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. "But he will not vanish utterly. A man who trades in disappearance leaves traces in finance, if not in flesh. We shall find him through his accounts." That evening, as fog once again crept through Baker Street, Holmes sat at his desk surrounded by ledgers borrowed from the company archives. I watched as he traced columns of figures, his pipe forgotten, his concentration absolute. "Here, Watson," he said at last, tapping a page. "The proof. Funds transferred under aliases corresponding to the initials of our vanished guests. A for Armitage, R for Rowden. But note the final entry. E.P. Emberleigh itself. He meant to sell the estate under the guise of liquidation, using the scandal to erase his tracks. Penfield's death was merely the closing act of his play. "Then what now?" I asked. Holmes leaned back, his eyes reflecting the dim firelight. "Now, my dear Watson, we hunt a man who has learned the art of making ghosts, and who may soon attempt to become one once more." Outside, the fog pressed thick against the window panes, and in the street below, a solitary cab passed, its wheels hissing upon wet cobbles. I could not shake the feeling that Emberleigh's shadow had followed us to London, stretching invisibly through the city's heart, and somewhere within that shadow, a living ghost watched and waited for Sherlock Holmes to close the circle he himself had drawn. The days that followed were marked by a tension that hung over Baker Street like a storm cloud waiting to break. Holmes slept little, ate less, and spoke only when his thoughts had crystallized into sharp, precise conclusions. His table had vanished beneath a forest of ledgers, correspondence, and notes, each sheet scrawled with figures, initials, and connecting lines drawn in his rapid hand. I had long since abandoned my attempts to maintain order amidst the chaos, knowing that to interfere with his system was to court disaster. What to me looked like the wreckage of thought was, to him, an intricate map, one whose lines led ever inward toward a single, hidden truth. "Watson," he said one morning, breaking a silence that had lasted nearly 2 hours, "we have reached the pivot upon which the entire affair turns. The forgeries, the disappearances, the deaths, each is a spoke in the same wheel, and the wheel is Rowden. You are sure, then, that he remains in London?" "As sure as I am that this fog still clings to the window panes. A man may alter his name and his appearance, but not his habits. Observe these transactions." He pushed a ledger toward me, his eyes glinting. 3 withdrawals within 48 hours, each from a different branch, each under a false identity, yet all corresponding to accounts Rowden himself established years ago under fictitious trusteeships. He is consolidating funds, preparing to disappear for good. "And yet he remains here?" I asked. Surely flight would be his first concern. Holmes smiled faintly. "He remains because his business is not finished. There is one thread yet to be severed. Me. He has made the mistake of measuring his wit against mine, and pride has stayed his hand. It is the oldest trap of intellect, Watson, to think oneself clever enough to control danger. At that moment, Mrs. Hudson entered bearing a telegram. Holmes snatched it up and read aloud. Meeting agreed upon. Same address. Midnight. Alone. A friend of the departed. Ah, he murmured. The invitation I expected. It would appear that Mr. Rowden wishes to parley. Surely you don't intend to go alone, I cried. On the contrary, my dear fellow, I fully intend to go with the utmost discretion and without your company. There are occasions when two are a crowd and one is opportunity. However, he paused, his gaze softening. I should be remiss not to prepare for contingencies. If I am not returned by dawn, you will inform Lestrade that the matter of Emberleigh is not yet concluded, and that my last appointment was at the derelict warehouses near Blackfriars Bridge. Holmes, I protested, this is madness. You know the man is desperate. He will stop at nothing. That, he said, reaching for his hat and overcoat, is precisely why he will hesitate. A desperate man seeks control, and control requires conversation. I have no fear of him, Watson, only curiosity. He smiled. That quick, thin smile, which meant no appeal, could move him, and a few moments later the door closed behind him. I paced the room for hours after his departure, my mind a tumult of anxiety. I tried to distract myself with medical journals, with the fire, with anything that might draw my thoughts from the vision of Holmes walking alone into danger. Midnight came and passed. The city outside fell into the uneasy hush that descends only upon London's deepest hours. Still there was no sign of him. It was shortly after 2 when a knock came at the door. I started up, half expecting Holmes himself, but instead found Inspector Lestrade standing upon the threshold, his face grave. "Dr. Watson," he said, "you'd best come with me. There's been an incident near the river. Your friend sent word before it happened." "Before what happened?" "Best not to talk here. Bring your coat." The night was thick with fog as we drove through the streets toward the river. The lamps cast halos of weak light that seemed to float upon the mist, and the city's noises were muffled to a low, endless murmur. When at last we reached Blackfriars Bridge, the cab halted before a row of disused warehouses, their windows dark, their doors chained. Lestrade led the way to one such door, where a constable stood guard with a lantern. Inside, the air was damp and heavy with the smell of river mud. Footprints, 2 distinct sets, marked the dust upon the floor, converging toward the center of the room. There, beside an overturned chair, lay a dark stain still glistening under the lantern light. A pistol had been dropped nearby. My heart clenched. "Holmes, alive," said Lestrade quickly. Though it was a close thing, he sent a message through a boy before the shot was fired. We found him 100 yards from here, grazed along the shoulder, half frozen but conscious. He's at the station now, said to bring you straight away. I scarcely recall the journey that followed. When at last I reached the station house, I found Holmes seated beside the fire, his arm bandaged but his expression as composed as ever. He greeted me with a faint smile. "Ah, Watson, your timing, as always, is impeccable. I trust Lestrade did not exaggerate my injuries?" "You were shot," I exclaimed. "That hardly admits exaggeration." "A mere scratch," he said dismissively. "Rowden was less fortunate." He gestured toward the adjoining room, where through the half-open door I caught a glimpse of a man lying upon a stretcher. The once handsome features were pallid and streaked with blood, the eyes half-closed yet still burning with a terrible awareness. "You didn't—" I began. Holmes shook his head. "No, he turned the weapon upon himself when cornered. Conscience or fear, it matters little now." I sat beside him, scarcely able to speak. "Tell me how it happened." He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment as though to summon the sequence afresh. "I arrived at the appointed place shortly before midnight. The river was thick with fog. The warehouses stood like sentinels of ruin. I entered through the side door. finding him waiting. Rowden, dressed as before, his face gaunt, but his composure unshaken. He spoke first. "You are punctual, Mr. Holmes," he said. "But then, death waits for no man." He held a pistol, but not raised. His tone was almost courteous. We spoke for some time. He confessed freely to the frauds, the forgeries, even the manipulation of Penfield's despair. He justified it all as retribution for a world that had undervalued his brilliance. "Lawyers are parasites of honesty," he said. I merely turned the trade to profit. At last he proposed what he called a bargain. He would reveal the location of the hidden funds, nearly £50,000 in exchange for safe passage out of England. I declined, naturally. He smiled, then said, "Then we are both condemned by our intellect, Mr. Holmes. You, because you cannot leave a mystery unsolved. I, because I cannot bear to lose." He raised the pistol. I moved, but too late. The ball grazed my shoulder. Before I could recover, he turned the weapon inward and fired. Holmes fell silent. The only sound was the crackle of the fire. After a moment, he added quietly, "The constables arrived moments later. I believe he lingered long enough to whisper something, though the sense was lost. Something about the house still standing and a door that would never close." We both sat in silence for a while. At last, Lestrade entered. "He's gone," he said simply. "Breathed his last not 5 minutes ago. Left this for you." He handed Holmes a small folded note, stained faintly with blood. Holmes unfolded it and read aloud. "Emberleigh is not finished. What you buried will rise again. When the walls whisper, listen." He crumpled the paper slowly. "Dramatic to the end," he murmured. "Yet, perhaps not. Without meaning. There were chambers in that house we did not explore. Rooms sealed by more than wood. I may one day return." "Surely not," I said. "You have done all any man could." Holmes regarded me with that enigmatic smile that so often masked deeper emotion. "Perhaps. But the mind is not so easily satisfied, Watson. There are echoes that travel farther than sound." As dawn broke over the Thames, pale and chill, we stepped outside together. The mist was lifting from the river, revealing the arches of the bridge gleaming wet in the morning light. Holmes stood for a long time without speaking, his eyes fixed upon the slow-moving water. Then he turned to me, his expression distant yet strangely serene. "Another ghost laid to rest," he said quietly. "And yet I wonder, was it the ghost of Emberleigh that died tonight, or merely the man who wore its mask?" He drew his coat closer about him and began to walk toward the cab waiting at the corner. I followed, saying nothing, for I knew that in his heart the case was far from over. Some mysteries, I thought, do not end with confession or death. They merely sleep, waiting for the right mind, or the wrong one, to wake them again. And so we left the river behind, the sound of the wheels upon the cobbles mingling with the slow toll of a distant church bell, marking the hour when night gives way to day and the living pass once more among the dead. London had returned to its customary pulse, its trams grinding, its cab wheels hissing through the damp, its citizens drifting through fog and business as though nothing extraordinary could ever stir beneath the calm grey surface. Yet for Holmes and me, the city no longer seemed quite the same. We had brought back with us a chill that no fire could entirely dispel, a lingering sense that the air itself carried whispers from Emberleigh's hollow rooms. Though Rowden lay dead and Penfield buried, the case had not closed upon Holmes's mind. He moved through the days like a man pursuing an echo that refused to fade. It was on the 3rd morning after Rowden's death that a new disturbance arrived. Subtle, almost absurdly trivial, yet to Holmes's mind as portentous as thunder on the horizon. I found him seated at the breakfast table, a letter unfolded beside his untouched cup of coffee. His expression, as he read, was one of profound interest laced with unease. "Watson," he said at last, You recall my remark at Blackfriars, that the affair might not yet be finished. I remember it well, I said. But surely, with both principals dead, what remains? He handed me the letter. This. It bore the postmark of Warwickshire, the county of Emberleigh, and was signed in a delicate, trembling hand by Miss Evelyn Penfield. Her words, though few, sent a shiver through me. Mr. Holmes, forgive the liberty, but I beg your counsel. Strange occurrences have resumed at the manor. Servants have fled. Doors once sealed are found, open by morning. And 2 nights ago, I distinctly heard my brother's voice calling from the east corridor. I am terrified. If you can return, I shall be in your debt. The house is not at rest. E.P. I looked up to find Holmes already rising from his chair. You mean to go back? I asked incredulously. He nodded gravely. There are riddles which refuse burial. You see, Watson, both Roden and Penfield spoke of the house as though it possessed intention, an intelligence of its own. Such language in the mouths of sane men demands scrutiny. The human mind does not invent the supernatural without reason. Something tangible feeds that illusion. You believe there is another culprit? Culprit or consequence, he replied. We shall discover which. By the afternoon train we were once again bound northward, the mist thickening about the fields until the landscape seemed to dissolve into memory. Holmes remained silent for most of the journey, his eyes half closed, his fingers tracing patterns in the condensation upon the glass. As dusk fell, he murmured, If the lady's account be truthful, then the phenomenon of the reopened doors indicates intervention from without, not within. The key question is who remains with motive now that both masters are gone. Could it be the steward's doing? I asked. Impossible, said Holmes. Brand is in custody, yet his imprisonment might not preclude the actions of an accomplice. There was always the matter of those servants who resigned immediately after the yard's arrival. It is time, I think, to see what Emberleigh still conceals beneath its sorrow. Night had descended by the time we reached the familiar avenue of elms. Emberleigh Manor rose before us, its windows dark, its chimneys like black spears against the sky. Miss Penfield herself met us at the door, pale and trembling, but visibly relieved. Her once graceful features were drawn with exhaustion, and her voice faltered as she led us to the library. It began 3 nights ago, she said. The wind had been high since dusk. I was in my room when I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, along the east corridor. I thought it some remaining servant, but when I called, there was no reply. Then a voice, my brother's voice, called my name from beyond the sealed door. I fainted. Since then, the locks refuse to hold. Each morning they stand open as though someone has passed through. Holmes listened intently, every trace of condescension gone from his manner. You are certain it was your brother's voice? Certain, she whispered. He called as he used to when we were children. Evelyn, wait. It was his tone, his inflection. I would stake my soul upon it. Holmes inclined his head gravely. Then we must assume either imitation or record. A voice from beyond the grave, though rare, is not the most improbable element I have encountered. You will do me the kindness of allowing no one to enter that corridor tonight, save myself and Dr. Watson. She agreed, though reluctantly, and withdrew. We dined in near silence, the servants moving about like ghosts themselves, fearful and eager to retire early. By 11, the house lay dark, save for a single lantern which Holmes and I carried as we ascended the staircase toward the east wing. The corridor stretched before us, long and shadowed, its portraits glimmering faintly under the thin light. A faint draught stirred the curtains, and somewhere within the walls a loose board creaked at intervals like the slow beating of a hidden heart. Holmes set down the lantern and examined the lock upon the door. It had indeed been forced from within. The splintered metal showed marks of recent tampering. Not the work of the supernatural, he muttered. Steel obeys only human hands. The mechanism has been pried open with a flat instrument, a knife or chisel. Note also these smears upon the frame. Candle wax, soft and yellow, modern, not from the house's own stores. He raised the lantern higher, and its glow caught something glinting upon the floor. It was a button, small, brass, and bearing a stamped insignia, Metropolitan Police. Lestrade's men, I suggested. Unlikely, said Holmes. This model belongs to uniforms no longer issued since last year. Our visitor wears discarded livery, perhaps to pass unchallenged. Curious indeed. He pressed the door open. Beyond lay the forbidden east wing, shrouded in dust and memory. The air was cold and dry, heavy with the scent of disuse. As we advanced, the lantern's light fell upon a tapestry that stirred slightly, as though moved by breath. Holmes paused, then reached behind it and drew forth a narrow speaking tube that descended into the floor. "Ha!" he exclaimed softly. The mystery of the voice. This tube connects to the lower chambers. A man stationed below could easily mimic any sound and project it here. Miss Penfield's haunting is no spirit, but artifice. Even as he spoke, a faint clatter echoed from beneath our feet, followed by the whisper of movement in the passage below. Holmes extinguished the lantern at once, plunging us into darkness. "We are not alone," he breathed. The sound grew louder, a slow tread ascending through the hidden stair we had discovered months before. Holmes crouched beside the door, motioning me to draw my revolver. Presently, a thin ray of light appeared through the crack beneath the wall panel. Then, as silently as a dream, the partition slid aside and a figure emerged carrying a covered lantern. For an instant, the stranger's face was hidden by a scarf and cap. But as Holmes stepped forward and seized his wrist, the light fell full upon his features, and I gasped aloud. It was not a stranger at all, but Inspector Lestrade. "Holmes!" he exclaimed, recoiling. "Good Lord, man, you near got yourself shot. What in heaven's name are you doing here?" "The very question I was about to ask you," Holmes said coolly. "You come creeping through secret panels at midnight in a haunted house. Hardly the conduct of Scotland Yard." Lestrade looked bewildered, rubbing his wrist. "I came because the Yard received a message, purporting to be from you, ordering me to meet you here tonight and bring no one. When I arrived, the servant swore you were upstairs. I found the door already forced. Then I heard voices in the corridor and, well, you can imagine my thoughts." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "A forged summons for both of us, then. Someone wished to assemble all the principals in one place, and under cover of night." He turned sharply toward the stair. "Come. The trap is set, and we are standing in its center." We descended swiftly to the lower passage, the air growing colder as we went. The speaking tube gleamed faintly in the lamplight, leading toward the sub-cellar. Holmes advanced, every muscle taut. Suddenly a sound, a whisper, drawn out and low, floated through the tube. "Holmes! Holmes!" It was Rowden's voice. Lestrade started, but Holmes only smiled grimly. "A phonograph cylinder," he said. "Pre-recorded. Clever, but not clever enough." At that moment, a gust of air extinguished the lantern, and the door behind us slammed with a deafening clang. Darkness engulfed us. Then came the hiss of escaping gas. I caught its acrid scent at once. "Move, Watson," Holmes cried. "The pipes, burst or tampered. Quickly." We stumbled toward the stair, half-blind, choking. Holmes's hand found mine, dragging me upward through the suffocating dark. Behind us, a roar erupted, the unmistakable thud of ignition. A wall of flame flared below, painting the corridor in ghastly light. We burst through the final door as smoke poured out around us. Lestrade fell to his knees, coughing violently. Holmes slammed the door and threw his weight against it. "Sir," he said between gasps, "our unseen adversary prefers fire to bullets. Emberleigh earns its name anew." We staggered into the cold night air as flames licked the lower windows. Miss Penfield, roused by the commotion, appeared at the doorway in her nightdress, her face white with terror. "The house, it's burning," she cried. "Indeed," Holmes said, straightening. "But better a house in ashes than a secret still breathing." And as the servants rushed to fetch water and the orange glow climbed higher into the fog, Holmes stood unmoving, his eyes reflecting the inferno. "Watson," he said softly, "someone remains who feared discovery more than death. We have flushed the ghost from its walls. But the living hand that struck the match walks free tonight." The fire roared on, and behind it, in the wind, I thought I heard laughter, thin, distant, and terribly human. By morning, Emberleigh Manor was little more than a blackened skeleton, its proud chimneys jutting from the ruins like charred bones. The fire had swept through the eastern wing before the villagers could reach the estate, consuming timbers that had stood for centuries and reducing the old corridors to smouldering heaps of ash. The air still carried that acrid stench of burnt oak and plaster when Holmes and I walked among the wreckage, our boots crunching over cinders. The fog had lifted, revealing a pale sky streaked with smoke, and in that bleached light the house looked almost peaceful, as though, after generations of secrecy, it had finally found release. Lestrade, weary but uninjured, oversaw the last of the constables as they cordoned off the grounds. "A close escape, gentlemen," he said grimly. "If we'd been a minute later, that gas would have cooked us alive. But what I can't fathom is who lit it. All the servants swear they saw no one." "Of course they saw no one," Holmes murmured, crouching beside a fragment of stone where black soot outlined a perfect semicircle. "Our culprit relied upon preparation, not presence. The ignition was timed or triggered remotely. Observe this residue, phosphorus mixed with magnesium filings, a chemical fuse. Someone set it earlier, expecting to destroy both us and the last trace of the house's mystery." Lestrade whistled softly. "That's devilish work. But why not strike sooner? If Rowden's dead, who's left to profit from it?" Holmes rose slowly, his expression distant. "That, my dear Lestrade, is precisely the question we must answer. The fire was no accident. It was an act of closure, final, deliberate, and well-informed. And the knowledge required to plan it could belong only to one who knew the manor's structure as intimately as its crimes." He turned toward the smouldering ruins. "Miss Penfield, perhaps, could tell us whether any plans or deeds of ownership survived the blaze." We found her standing near the remains of the terrace, her eyes red from smoke and sleeplessness. She was calm. Too calm, I thought, as though grief had frozen into composure. "Everything is gone," she said softly. "The East Wing, the family records, the portraits, all of it. Emberleigh has taken itself back to the earth." Holmes regarded her steadily. "Not entirely, Miss Penfield. There remains the question of the arsonist and of your safety. You must leave this place at once." She looked at him then, and a faint, almost bitter smile touched her lips. "You still think I am in danger? Mr. Holmes, danger and I have become companions. The house consumed itself because it had nothing else left to devour." Her words unsettled me. There was an odd detachment in her tone, an acceptance too serene for tragedy. Holmes, however, merely inclined his head. "Even ashes may conceal embers," he said. "I will remain until I have examined the ruins." She turned away, murmuring something I did not catch, and walked slowly toward the surviving coach house. I watched her go, feeling again that indefinable chill that had shadowed every hour in her presence. Holmes noticed my gaze and said quietly, "You perceive it too. The calm of the condemned or the calm of the guilty, it remains to be seen which." For much of that day we sifted through what the fire had spared. Holmes's patience seemed inexhaustible. He moved among the ruins like a physician among the remains of some vast corpse, touching, lifting, testing. Near dusk, he called me over to a patch of earth near the foundations of the east wing. "Look here, Watson. Beneath the ash, the outline of a box, small, iron-bound. It was buried, not burned." We unearthed it carefully. The metal was hot to the touch but intact. Within lay papers, charred at the edges yet legible, and beneath them a small leather-bound journal. Holmes opened it and scanned a few lines, his eyes flashing. "Good heavens," he murmured. "The steward's handwriting. Brand's. These are his confessions." Lestrade approached at once, astonished. "Confessions? You mean he wrote them before his arrest?" Holmes nodded. "Written, but never delivered. He feared his master's wrath." "Listen," he read aloud. "I do what I am told, yet the guilt lies heavier each night. The lawyer directs all, though the master believes himself the author. The woman knows nothing. If the truth ever comes to light, it will not be in Emberleigh, for the house itself conceals the final vault. Beneath the foundations, sealed with the rest, there lies the beginning of all our sins." Holmes closed the book slowly. "The lawyer directs all." The lawyer, meaning Rowden. Yet Rowden's body lies in London, beyond doubt. Therefore, what vault, what beginning could he mean? "Something hidden before his death?" I suggested. "Something older," Holmes corrected. "Rowden discovered a secret that predated his crimes, a secret worth killing to preserve." Brand's mention of a vault beneath the foundations implies architecture we have not yet uncovered. The fire, I suspect, was meant to obliterate its entrance. He rose abruptly. "Watson, fetch a lantern. We dig tonight." By the time darkness fell, we had cleared enough debris to reveal a section of flagstone unblackened by flame. It was slightly raised, its edges sealed with ancient mortar. Holmes knelt beside it, his fingers tracing the joints. "Here," he whispered, "the breath of the house." He produced a chisel and worked at the seam until the slab lifted with a groan. Beneath yawned a narrow shaft descending into utter darkness. "Good Lord," I breathed. "Another passage?" Holmes's reply was almost reverent. "The final one, I think." He tied a rope to a beam and lowered himself first, the lantern swinging in his hand. I followed close behind. The descent was steep, the air thick and cold, smelling of stone and stagnant water. At the bottom we found a chamber, circular and low, with walls of rough masonry glistening in the lamplight. In the center stood a stone altar, or perhaps a table, upon which lay several small objects, tarnished candlesticks, scraps of parchment, and, astonishingly, a human skull. "Ancient," Holmes murmured, examining the relics. "The remains of a priory chapel, perhaps, the house's true foundation. But note, Watson, how the symbols upon these parchments are not ecclesiastical, they are alchemical, symbols of transmutation and binding. This place was once a workshop for men who believed knowledge could conquer death." He paused, his expression unreadable. "Now do you see, my friend, why Penfield spoke of the house as alive? This was no mere dwelling. It was built upon centuries of human obsession. Each generation merely inherited its disease." Before I could answer, a sound echoed faintly down the shaft above us. The scrape of footsteps, cautious and deliberate. Holmes's hand shot to my arm. "The trap closes again," he whispered. A shadow crossed the mouth of the shaft. Then a voice, trembling yet distinct, drifted down. "Mr. Holmes? Dr. Watson? Are you there?" It was Miss Penfield. "Stay where you are," Holmes called. "This place is unsafe." But before he could ascend, something thudded above, a heavy object striking stone. Dust rained down upon us. Holmes extinguished the lantern, plunging us into darkness. "Back," he hissed. "She's not alone." The footsteps above quickened, retreating. A second later came the clang of metal as the slab was dragged into place, sealing us in. We were entombed. The darkness pressed around us like a physical weight. I felt my throat tighten as the air grew still. Holmes's voice, when it came, was calm but strained. "Courage, Watson. The mortar is old. We may yet force our way through." He struck a match and examined the walls, the flame casting monstrous shadows. There, an opening behind this altar, narrow but sufficient. It leads to the drainage tunnels that connect with the river, if my memory of the plans serves me. With superhuman effort, we shifted the stone aside and squeezed through the gap. The passage beyond was little more than a fissure, damp and foul, but it sloped upward. For what felt like hours, we crawled through the darkness, scraping knees and elbows against the stone until at last a faint gleam appeared ahead. Holmes pressed forward, and we emerged into the open night beside the river bank, gasping for air. We had scarcely regained our feet when Holmes turned back toward the burning ruins, silhouetted against the horizon. His face was set in grim comprehension. "She sealed it," he said quietly. "Miss Penfield sealed us in and vanished. The final act of Emberleigh." Lestrade and his men found us at dawn. Of Miss Penfield there was no sign. Her room stood empty, her carriage horse gone. Only the iron box remained to prove that we had not dreamed the night's horror. Holmes handed the journal to Lestrade with a curt word and turned away. We drove back toward the station. He sat silent, his profile etched against the paling sky. At length he spoke. "There are crimes, Watson, which transcend punishment. The house burned, but its contagion remains. Miss Penfield was neither victim nor villain, but something in between, the living echo of all that Emberleigh bred." He paused, his eyes distant. "The law may close its books, but He broke off, glancing once more toward the horizon, where smoke still coiled like a ghost above the trees. "I suspect Emberleigh's story is not yet ended. Some houses do not die, they merely wait." London received us again as though nothing had happened. Its omnipresent fog, its restless crowds, its clatter and commerce. Yet to me it seemed altered, as though a subtle shadow followed us through the very streets. Even Holmes, usually so swift to turn from one adventure to the next, carried with him a silence that deepened with each passing day. Emberleigh had not been exorcised by fire. Rather, it had transplanted itself into his mind, where it burned in a colder and more enduring fashion. For several weeks he kept to his rooms at Baker Street, declining all new cases. His violin lay silent in its case, his chemical apparatus untouched. He would spend hours pacing the floor, the fingers of one hand pressed to his temple, as if trying to fix some elusive pattern that refused to reveal itself. I had seen him thus before, but never with such intensity. There was something personal in this obsession, something I could not yet name. One morning I entered the sitting room to find him surrounded by maps, letters, and sketches spread across the table. The air was thick with tobacco smoke, and he scarcely glanced up as I entered. "Watson," he said, "did it never strike you as curious that Miss Penfield's disappearance occurred at precisely the hour the fire reached its height?" I took a chair. "You believe she perished in the flames?" Holmes shook his head. "Perished? No. Escaped, certainly. But not alone." He tapped a photograph lying before him, one of those ghastly press reproductions made from sketches. It depicted Felix Roden's corpse upon the stretcher at the station house. You see, the features are indistinct, blurred, almost conveniently so, and the height recorded by the yard's physician differs by 2 inches from Roden's known measure. I have confirmed the discrepancy through his tailor. The man who died at Blackfriars was not Felix Roden. I stared at him, unable to speak. "Then who?" "An accomplice," Holmes said quietly. "A substitute corpse prepared to complete the illusion of Roden's death. The genuine article remains at liberty, and with Miss Penfield." I felt a chill. "Good God, Holmes, you mean she aided him willingly?" "Willingly," Perhaps not at first, Holmes mused. But there is a curious alchemy between guilt and fascination. Penfield's brother was ruined. Her home tainted by scandal. Rowden offered her both explanation and escape. I believe she fled with him the night of the fire. He is clever enough to have foreseen the necessity of a decoy. The flames erased all that could have contradicted his deception. He turned from the table, his eyes bright with that feverish energy that was the surest sign his faculties had reawakened. This, Watson, is the true resurrection of Emberleigh, the rebirth of its mastermind beneath a new identity, and he has already begun to act. What proof have you? He handed me a letter that had arrived that morning. It bore no signature, only a crest stamped in red wax, the emblem of the defunct Penfield estate. Mr. Holmes, you failed to understand the lesson Emberleigh sought to teach. You destroyed a house, but not its purpose. The world is full of doors. I've only to choose another. Should you pursue me, you will find that even London has cellars deeper than Emberleigh's vaults. A friend. The paper trembled in my hand. Then he is here, in London. Beyond doubt, said Holmes, and if I am correct, already at work restoring his old schemes under a new name. That evening we dined together in silence. Outside, the fog pressed thickly against the windows, muffling the sound of carriages on Baker Street. Holmes smoked in thoughtful intervals, then said suddenly, "You recall the insurance firm connected with Rowden, the Metropolitan Fidelity Company? It declared bankruptcy within a fortnight of the Emberleigh affair, yet one of its branches has recently reopened under new management. The proprietor styles himself Mr. Arthur Fenwick. The handwriting upon his registration papers matches Rowden's almost perfectly, though cleverly disguised. The office is in Chancery Lane. I propose to visit him tomorrow. Alone, accompanied by my friend the doctor, whose disarming candor may serve as a useful distraction. The next morning we set out under a sky the color of pewter. The streets glistened with drizzle, and London seemed subdued as though holding its breath. The office of Arthur Fenwick occupied a narrow building squeezed between two legal houses. Its brass plate shone new and bright, incongruous amidst the soot-stained brickwork. Inside, a clerk ushered us into a small chamber where the air smelled faintly of lavender polish and paper. Behind a heavy mahogany desk sat a gentleman of middle years, clean-shaven, elegantly dressed, his hair touched with grey. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said pleasantly, rising to greet us. "I had hoped to meet you one day. Your reputation is a formidable one." The voice, the measured tone, the faint inflection of irony, struck me like a blow. It was Rowden's voice, yet the face before us bore only the ghost of his features, altered by surgical craft or clever disguise. It was difficult to tell. Holmes inclined his head with equal composure. "You honor us, Mr. Fenwick. Your establishment is new, I think?" "Reconstituted," the man said smoothly. "I have taken over several dormant accounts. London's old wealth requires careful tending, and I have found the profession most accommodating." Holmes's gaze wandered idly to a framed print upon the wall, a view of Emberleigh Manor before the fire. "A curious choice of decoration," he said softly. Fenwick's smile did not waver. "A beautiful ruin, is it not? A reminder, perhaps, that even the grandest structures fall to time, and that those who endure must build anew." Holmes stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Indeed. Yet I find it remarkable that you admire so closely a house whose foundations concealed such profitable secrets." For the first time, the other man's composure flickered. "You accuse me of something, sir?" "Accuse?" Holmes's tone was almost conversational. "No, Mr. Rowden, I merely observe. You vanished with a fortune. You staged your own death, burned your evidence, and returned beneath another name. But I regret to inform you that one witness survived your fire." He drew from his pocket the small, scorched journal we had recovered from the ruins. Brand's confession, authenticated by his handwriting. It mentions you by name. The Yard will be delighted." Rowden's eyes darkened. "You are bold to confront me here, Holmes. I have influence now, connections. The law you serve would never touch me." Holmes's smile was thin as a knife blade. "Then you will forgive me if I have already taken the liberty of sending a transcript of this document to Inspector Lestrade." For a heartbeat, the air between them froze. Then Rowden's hand darted toward the drawer of his desk. But Holmes was quicker. He seized the man's wrist, wrenching the drawer open to reveal a small pistol gleaming within. The clerk burst in at the commotion, but Holmes's voice cut through the confusion like steel. "Watson, the Yard!" Within minutes, the room was a flurry of uniforms. Rowden made one final, futile attempt to reach for the weapon before Lestrade himself entered, his revolver drawn. "End of the line, Fenwick," he said curtly. "Or should I say Rowden? We've kept your chair warm since Blackfriars." Rowden's defiance collapsed into silence. As they led him away, I saw him glance back toward the Emberleigh print, and in his eyes burned something between hatred and triumph. That night, after the formalities were concluded, Holmes and I sat once more by the fire at Baker Street. He smoked without speaking for some time, then said quietly, "We have caught the man, but not the meaning. He rebuilt himself from ruin as easily as a house rises from its ashes. The world will call it crime. I call it inevitability. Men like Rowden thrive because they understand how deeply corruption roots itself in respectability." He rose and stood at the window, gazing out into the fog. "Emberleigh burned, Watson, yet it has spread. There are Emberleighs in every city, places built on deceit, kept standing by silence. That house was but a mirror." I said nothing, for there was nothing to add. Outside, the gaslights glimmered dimly through the mist, each one a small, wavering star in a city that seemed endless. Holmes turned back toward the fire at last, his profile etched in orange light, and spoke in a tone almost gentle. "Sleep well, my friend. The case is closed, for now. But remember this, when a house dies, it does not vanish. It merely changes address." He smiled faintly, and for the first time in many weeks, the weight seemed to lift from his shoulders. Yet long after he retired, I remained awake, listening to the distant hum of the city and wondering, as he surely did, whether somewhere in the maze of London's streets a door had already opened again, one that led not to safety, but back into the waiting heart of Emberleigh. It was a week after Rowden's arrest, when Holmes finally allowed himself to rest, or at least to feign rest. The case had concluded in the eyes of Scotland Yard, the forgeries traced, the hidden funds accounted for, the true identity of Arthur Fenwick revealed beyond dispute. To the public it was a story of fraud and false death, of the triumph of law over cunning. But I, who had seen Holmes's eyes during those long nights after Emberleigh, knew better. Victory, in his mind, was a hollow concept when the ghosts of logic refused to lie down. I found him one grey morning at the window of Baker Street, watching the carriages crawl through the mist like dark beetles across a sea of vapour. His pipe had gone out, and he held it forgotten between his fingers. "Watson," he said without turning, "do you believe in evil as a force, distinct from the failings of men?" The question startled me. As a doctor, I would say that what we call evil is often but sickness of the mind or spirit, misery that festers into cruelty. "And yet," he murmured, "there are times when I think certain places breed it, as marshes breed fever. Emberleigh was one such place. Rowden and Penfield were not its creators, but its offspring. The house molded them as surely as a sculptor shapes clay." He fell silent then, and I sensed that this reflection was no idle speculation, but a continuation of a thought begun long ago. The fire burned low, throwing up occasional sparks that snapped softly in the grate. At last, he turned toward me with something of his old composure. "Lestrade will call at noon," he said. There remains a question of papers found in Rowden's office. Minor details, but worth examining. When the inspector arrived, he brought with him a satchel filled with documents recovered from the cellars of the Metropolitan Fidelity Company. Among the ledgers and receipts lay one small sealed envelope, yellowed with age. Its address was written in an elegant, looping hand, to be opened only by Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Lestrade claimed no knowledge of its contents. Holmes regarded it in silence for several moments before breaking the seal. Inside lay a single folded sheet and, to my astonishment, a small brass key tied with a strip of faded ribbon. He read the note slowly, his brows knitting closer as he went. Then, with a quiet exhalation, he passed it to me. "Mr. Holmes, if this letter finds you, then know that I am no longer of this world. The key enclosed unlocks what remains of Emberleigh. Its heart, not destroyed by fire, but preserved where the river bends beneath the old willows a mile from the house. There you will find what I could not bring myself to destroy. I was complicit, though not by choice. The truth sleeps below the earth. Let it remain so, unless you crave the knowledge that ruins." E.P. Holmes took the key back from me and held it up to the light. "A mile from the house," he murmured. "By the willows. The river that skirts the estate widens there, an ideal place for concealment." Lestrade frowned. "You're not thinking of another expedition, surely? The yard's done with Emberleigh. Let sleeping ghosts lie, say I." But Holmes smiled, that faint, inscrutable smile of his. "Ah, my dear Lestrade, ghosts seldom sleep soundly when they have something left to say." The next day found us once more upon the familiar road to Warwickshire, though this time the landscape seemed softer, the air less oppressive. The ashes of Emberleigh had already been gathered and carted away. A thin veil of snow now covered the ruins, lending them an innocence they had never possessed in life. Guided by the map Holmes sketched from memory, we followed the river's slow curve through the meadows until we reached the stand of ancient willows. Their roots curled into the muddy bank, like fingers clutching secrets. "There," said Holmes, pointing to a patch of ground slightly raised above the rest. "Note the depression where the snow melts more quickly. The earth has been disturbed." He knelt, brushed aside the thin frost, and began to dig with a small spade he had brought for the purpose. Within minutes the blade struck metal. Together we cleared the soil to reveal an old iron coffer, no larger than a travelling case, its lock rusted but intact. The brass key from Miss Penfield's letter fitted perfectly. Inside lay a bundle of papers wrapped in oilcloth, a small silver crucifix, and a child's locket. The locket opened to reveal a miniature portrait. 2 young faces, a boy and a girl, both bearing the unmistakable features of the Penfield family. Holmes studied it for a long time before speaking. "Evelyn and Alistair," he said softly. "But note the date engraved within. 1849. 30 years before either of them were born. The likeness is uncanny, yet impossible." I examined it closely and saw what he meant. The resemblance was indeed remarkable, but the faces were those of children from another age. Beneath the portrait was an inscription, partly effaced, for those who must atone in blood. Holmes turned to the papers, which proved to be fragments of an old diary written in a slanting, formal hand. He read aloud. "The experiments proceed as the prior directed. The substance drawn from the quickened heart shows promise. The child endures, though the mother's spirit wanes. The Lord forgive what we attempt in his name." The writing ended abruptly, followed by a signature too faded to decipher. Holmes's face darkened. "Watson, this confirms what I suspected. The foundation of Emberleigh was not merely monastic, but experimental, alchemical, medical, perhaps even occult. The priory upon which the house was built concealed attempts at preserving life through transfusion or distillation. The Penfields were heirs to a legacy of human tampering older than science itself. Generation after generation, the house drew to it minds obsessed with mastery over death. He replaced the papers carefully. Evelyn Penfield knew this history. That was her true inheritance and her curse. Rowden's fraud merely awakened what the house had buried. When she wrote that the truth would ruin, she spoke with perfect accuracy, yet she could not leave it buried. We reburied the coffer where we had found it, Holmes sealing the earth once more with deliberate finality. "The living have meddled enough," he said. "Let the dead keep their own counsel." As we walked back toward the village, a soft snow began to fall, muffling our footsteps. The air was clean and sharp, and for the first time in many weeks I felt a sense of quiet returning. Holmes walked beside me in silence until the manor's ruins came into view once more, their black outlines softened beneath the white. "There is a peculiar justice in this, Watson," he said at last. "The house that devoured generations now lies entombed beneath its own ashes, yet its story will live, not as scandal, but as caution. Civilization builds upon layers of forgetting. Sometimes the only mercy is not to dig too deeply." We lingered a moment longer upon the hill overlooking the estate. The wind sighed through the bare trees, carrying with it a sound like distant breathing. I do not know if Holmes heard it too, but he stood motionless, his head slightly inclined, as though listening to something faint and far. Then he turned abruptly, and the spell broke. That evening, back in London, the familiar warmth of Baker Street seemed almost unreal. The fog had returned, soft and golden in the lamplight. Holmes sat at his desk, the fire reflecting in his eyes. "You see, Watson," he said quietly, "mystery is not the absence of truth, but the presence of too much of it. One must choose which part to understand and which to leave in shadow." He reached for his violin and drew the bow across the strings. The first notes rose slow and melancholy, filling the room with a sound like remembrance itself. As the music swelled, I found my thoughts returning to Emberleigh, the echoing halls, the whispering corridors, the woman's calm voice as the fire consumed her home. Outside, the snow fell silently over London, and the city's countless lamps flickered in the mist like watchful eyes. The tune lingered, trembling between beauty and sorrow, and for a moment I thought I heard another sound woven through it. A low sigh, distant but unmistakable, as though some door, far away, had closed at last. And with that, the case of the disappearing guests of Emberleigh Manor came to its true end. Not in triumph or revelation, but in silence, deep, eternal, and merciful.